Today we are here to talk about the best nonfiction that I read in 2022. This is always a tough list to make because I think of all the kinds of books I read, I'm probably the best at picking, like if I pick up 20 nonfiction books, there's a good chance that like half of them are going to be 4.5s or 5s. I'm good at knowing what I like in nonfiction, and I have good sources of people giving me recommendation for nonfiction. So anyway, I have a very high hit rate of like loving a nonfiction book relative to the overall nonfiction I read. So while this didn't feel like a particularly like notable nonfiction year for me, it did still have a ton of really highly rated books because it's just a category of book I'm good at selecting. So I always struggle with how to do the nonfiction list. Do I talk about what I learned from each of these books? Do I talk about like in detail what they're about? I think this year I'm gonna focus on just what I liked about the nonfiction. And then a lot of these were in more detailed discussion videos somewhere in the past year. So if there was one, I will point you to that if you want to hear like some more things about what I learned from the book. So I think that's how I'll handle that. And then also I should note, when I'm filming this, the HarperCollins strike is still happening. I honestly thought it would be resolved by now, so I didn't put this disclaimer in some of the other videos that I've already filmed that you will still be seeing at least one of them. I think next week the romance video is going up and I did not put this disclaimer in there, but HarperCollins strike is still happening. Some of my best ofs are from HarperCollins. I'm in a creator chat where somebody reached out to the folks who are on strike and asked them how they would like us to handle this. And they just asked that we mention the strike is going on and where you can get information. So I'm still gonna include those. And I also wanna point you to the @HCP Union Instagram account. That's where I've been getting my updates about it. If you have not signed their open letter, I would definitely encourage you to do that. The publishing industry is known to be very underpaid. And in my view, I'm generally pro-union, but specifically even in this case, what they are asking for is like beyond reasonable. So I would encourage you guys to go check that out. And yeah, I guess those are all my disclaimers. I've been talking for a while. Let's just get into the list. Okay, number 10 is, I've got 2 4-stars at the bottom of the list, and it was very hard to decide which 2 I was gonna include. The first one I decided to include is Laziness Does Not Exist by Devin Price. This, I just agree with this, and I, especially at the beginning of the year, was doing a lot of reflection on the meaning and value of work. I'm trying to flesh out my political and like socioeconomic point of view as an adult who's like actually had time to live in the world and think about things. And one of the things that I've been mulling on in relation to that is what is work. And I think that this book was a very thought-provoking examination of like our presuppositions about laziness and work and about what meaningful or real work looks like, obsession with productivity in the American culture. I would say I think particularly this very much speaks to me as an American, where we have like this sort of cult of productivity where we are obsessed with it. But I think also just in the age, oh my gosh, can you hear my cat is having zoomies right now. Also just in the age of internet grind culture, I also think that this is really valuable. I thought that this had some really, if I'm remembering rightly, because it's been a while since I've read this, my memory of the book, that this has some good intersectional discussions too about like how we think about laziness vis-a-vis certain minority statuses. So yeah, just overall, I thought this was very approachable. The audio was good. I did this on audio originally. Thought-provoking. If laziness or productivity or work stuff is something that you're interested in, I think that this gets into that. And this is in my aesthetics of productivity or aesthetics of work video. I use this as a source. Number 9 is The Misunderstood Jew by Amy Jill Levine. And I guess this is my top 4-star. And I did this one only as audio, so I don't have it in physical form. But so when we get further up the list, you will see this was definitely a year of me really growing in my own exploration of sort of post-evangelicalism for myself. So if you don't know, my background is like fundamentalist evangelicalism. That is no longer how I identify. We won't even get into all of that. But anyway, that's my background. And so this year I've done a ton of deconstruction over the last, let's say, decade. And this year I feel like was sort of a real intentional reconstruction period for me. A lot of it has been sort of mulling in the back of my mind, you know what I mean? Like where you're sort of like subconsciously thinking about things or making decisions. But this was a year for me to actually like reflect on some of that. So one of the things that I had kind of a re-emerging interest in was some of the kind of like biblical study stuff. And I really loved this approach. This was basically talking about the Jewishness of Jesus. And also, like, I think it was really challenging to me. Part of what I really liked about this was that it was specifically critiquing Christian feminists who have construed certain parts of Judaism in a particular way to like make Jesus a feminist. And I felt very convicted by that because when I was like kind of on my way out, I definitely, I think unconsciously did some of that. So I thought that was great. And it also has a lot of discussion about like interfaith dialogue that I thought was great. So yeah, anyway, I just thought this was thought-provoking, had lots of like little recontextualizing nuggets of things that I was aware of but hadn't thought about from a certain angle. And I love nonfiction that does that. Like it makes you see the world in a new way. Okay, and then number 8 is my first 4.5 star, because like I said, we have an abundance of great books in this category. The Whiteness of Wealth by Dorothy A. Brown, How the Tax System Impoverishes Black Americans and How We Can Fix It. I think this is super thought-provoking. Oh gosh, how to even talk about this. What I like about this is that I think that it reframes inequality in the context of the taxation system in a way that is really, it takes a big picture view. Like it's a great, basically it's a great example of looking at macro systems and how they perpetuate oppression, even if that wasn't like the stated or conscious intent, that it really explores how the American taxation system, perpetuation maybe, of an underclass that is based on race a lot of times. So especially because I have an accounting degree and I work with accountants all day. I'm not an accountant these days, but I work with accountants all day. I just think that this really resonated. This is one that I have brought up for our finances DEI book club. Like we were talking about doing some of that. And I think that this would be a really good book club discussion for people who are nerdy about money. So yeah, I really like this. I thought this was well done, short, and thought-provoking. Okay, and then number 7 is Anti-Diet, Reclaim Your Time, Money, Well-Being, and Happiness Through Intuitive Eating by Christy Harrison. One thing that I have come to feel in the last year or two is that I don't want to speak in detail about diet stuff in videos that are not fully dedicated to that, where I can give the full context. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to point you to my Aesthetics of Wellness video where I talk more about this. But in general, this is a 4.5 and high on the list, so you can kind of guess what I thought about it. But I think that this really resonated with me personally and kind of helped me concretize some of the things that I had been thinking about while listening to things like Maintenance Phase. And anyway, you can go check out that video if you want to see my full thoughts. But yeah, number 7. And then number 6 is Empire of Pain by Patrick, what is his name? I always abbreviate it as PRK, Patrick Keefe. I forget what the R is right now. This was a huge book last year, and this is basically a biography of a family, which I don't know that I've read a ton of, and it's looking at the Sackler family and kind of their history in the pharmaceutical industry and how that led to where we are in America with pain management and Oxycontin addiction, just like the opioid crisis. I thought this was a really well done biography of the family. I think what it would have made this a 5-star for me would have been if it had done more with the business stuff, because that was my favorite part of it. I love detailed histories of business that are really engaging. So I would have really enjoyed that, but that wasn't quite the book's project. But as always with PRK, extremely well written, very thought-provoking, super meaty, like really a big chunky big boy. And he just like really gets in the nooks and crannies, and it's a very interesting family and an interesting family history. So yeah, the hype was well deserved on this one. Okay, and then I have 2 books that I read at the same time, and I feel like what makes this a 4.5, but together I feel like this is a reading experience at number 5. So Hood Feminism, Notes from the Women That a Movement Forgot by Mickey Kendall, and then Bad Fat Black Girl, Notes from a Trap Feminist by Cecily Bowen. I read these in the same vlog, so I just feel like they really speak to each other. This is more sociological nonfiction with some memoir elements, whereas this is a memoir with some sociological elements, so they're sort of nice inverses. I think if you were looking to, I think this is a really approachable first stop if you were trying to understand intersectional feminism and issues that are exploring how issues are multifaceted and have a lot of different considerations, that the world is not black and white, that there's a lot of gray, and there's a lot of, what about this, and how does this impact this? I think this is a great example and very accessible book that examines a lot of that. And then I just love this. I felt like this is like a pop culture based memoir. And I thought all of that was super just enjoyable and interesting. I thought the voice of this memoir was great. And I just loved her perspective, some of the things she was talking about, like fatness. I don't know, just in general, I thought that these were both great, and I thought they were a great reading experience that happened basically accidentally. I read these together, and that ended up being a great experience. Okay, we are in the top 4, and this is hard, guys, because really, my top 4.5s, I am tempted to go back and give them 5 stars. I might do that at some point. I don't think I'm quite ready, but these top 2 4.5s are like a notable step up from the rest of the ones we've been talking about. These are just so good. I'm gonna say number 4 is In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. I also read Her Body and Other Parties this year, which I gave 5 stars to. So I think we can officially say that Carmen Maria Machado is rapidly becoming a favorite author. She just hasn't produced enough for me to fully say that yet. But I feel very similarly about her as I feel about Roxane Gay, which is I love her voice, her writing, and her sort of just view of the world. Her perspective is so wonderful. And this memoir is unlike any other I've read. It's kind of experimental, and it is documenting domestic abuse, kind of how she got into that relationship, how she got out of it, what it did to her, what it did to the other person. It's sapphic, so it's also exploring domestic violence from a queer perspective, which is not something that always is highlighted. This is just such a good book. It is very hyped and very deservedly so, and it works really well as audio, but I also went back and read part of it physically, and I think it also works really well physically because it has little directions telling you to go to certain pages. So this is one that you could do as audio and then go read it physically and have enhanced or different experience. Just the writing in this is astonishing. I just love her. I love her. I want her to produce more so that I can officially crown her a favorite author, because I have loved both of the books I've read from her. This might end up being 5 stars eventually. Same with I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. Man, this one is definitely on the bubble of being 5. I think it gets a little weaker towards the end, and I did give a full review of this in the wrap up of the month that I did it, so I'll try to remember to link to that. I just love this because I love a memoir where it would not have been as good of a book if somebody did a biography of them, or if they had a ghostwriter doing an autobiography. This is just a very distinctive style. I believe it came out of a one-woman show that Jeanette McCurdy was doing. So I think it works really well as audio. She's an actress, obviously, so she also performs it really well. And just the number of, it needs every content warning you can think of, okay? But just the thoughtfulness and the work she has done to reflect on her life is so evident in every page. I particularly love that it's sort of destigmatizing the fact that a lot of people don't have that kind of idyllic relationship with a parent, especially mothers kind of get put on this pedestal where they're either all good or all bad. And I think that this is a document of a very complicated relationship, and it's really a book that's justifying its provocative title. And I think it does that. And also just the exploration of child stardom and the pitfalls of that I thought were super interesting. Yeah, just all in all, I thought that this was one of the best memoirs I read this year, certainly, and maybe one of the best memoirs I've ever read. Again, it and In the Dream House, I'm maybe I need to bump these up to 5 stars. I'm not quite quite there yet, but possibly. So anyway, you don't need me to tell you how good that book was. It's been everywhere. The other thing it does is it blends humor with tragedy in a really wonderful way. I think as does our first 5-star pick, which is number 2, Know My Name by Chanel Miller. This book destroyed me. This won my tournament of books I was doing in the fall, or like late summer, early fall. And if you watch that vlog, you will see I was very resistant to reading this because I was like, oh my gosh, I just don't know if I'm going to be in the headspace for it. I purposely read it physically because I could not bear to do it as audio, because the idea of somebody reading their story that is so intense like that, I just couldn't deal with it. And it is very intense. This is basically, if you don't know her story, Chanel Miller was a victim of an assault that was very notorious. Brock Turner was her assailant. She wrote this incredibly powerful victim impact statement that went viral, I think back in like 2015, 16, kind of that era. And I remember reading it and being devastated by that statement. And her writing is as good in this memoir as it was in that statement. She is just incredibly gifted as a writer, as an observer and teller of her own life. And it is such dark material in a lot of ways, but it is also very funny and dry in places, which I appreciated that about the Jeanette McCurdy one. And I think this shares that quality of, I don't know, to me that shows such somebody who really, like I said, has done the work to process their trauma is able to then have jokes about it. Do you know what I mean? So anyway, the writing itself in this is absolutely wonderful. It's a 5-star, which to me is an all-time favorite book because it is one of the best written memoirs I have ever read. It is absolutely just an excellent, excellent version of what it is. It will make you cry, but it will earn the tears that it makes you cry, which is all I really ask for from books that make me, sob into my pillow or into my kitty cat's fur in despair of the human condition. And number 1, the other 5-star in this category is How Jesus Became God, The Exaltation of a Jewish Preacher from Galilee by Bart Ehrman. Now, Bart Ehrman was a bogeyman for me when I was an evangelical. He was that guy who was like destroying people's faith, and I think he still does, but at the time he was, I believe, at UNC Chapel Hill, which was in the same conference of the campus ministry organization I was in. So I know that they had effort to reclaim the students who were losing their faith from him. And I just thought he was such a big, scary, bad man. And I read, because, I wanted to be one of those people who challenge themselves. So I read, I think it was Misquoting Jesus, and was like, okay, this was not, I see what he's saying. I mean, he's wrong about some of these things, but I see what he's saying, and okay. And I thought I was so brave and whatever for challenging myself to read this. But I did not ever want to read this because it just felt blasphemous to me. I saw Bart Ehrman on some random YouTube video, and it made me think maybe now's the time to go ahead and pick this up, because I think this came out when I was in grad school, if I'm remembering rightly. At that point, just deconstructing things, and I didn't need this to be added to the confusion of what I was doing. So anyway, I was like, you know what? I'm finally gonna go ahead and pick that up. I remember that was the big hot book back when it was coming out, and you know what, I'm finally gonna confront this scary man who's trying to ruin people's faith. But at this point, whatever. That wasn't really the perspective I had at that point, whatever. Anyway, I'm rambling. So I finally picked this up, and this was just such a milestone book for me that it has to be number 1, because it helped me see how far I've come since I was first engaging with some of the ideas he's talking about, because everything he says, I was taught from grad school from a faithful perspective. So it's the same facts, but spun, or the perspective was, here's how this can be faith promoting. Reading it now and seeing the same facts and seeing no, I feel his explanation is a lot simpler and a lot more logical. It was just oh wow, okay, these ideas that were so scary to me at some point are no longer scary to me. They make sense. I don't know. Anyway, I don't want to yuck anyone's yum or knock what anybody holds as a dearly held belief, because I've been just discussing, I've certainly been there. But for me, this was just very catalyzing, or sort of it crystallized, I think, a lot of places where I am with a lot of this particular topic, and it feels like a milestone of my journey out of evangelicalism. So I think very fondly of this. I've come to really like Bart Ehrman. He started a podcast called Misquoting Jesus, which is on YouTube, but it's also, you know, Apple Podcasts, whatever. So I've been really enjoying listening to that. And he's also just like the most adorable, genial, sweet little man. Like, he has such a sweet little laugh, and I don't know, it's just so funny now that I'm like watching him talk about these things, and at some point thought he was like some scary destroyer, crusher of Christians' dreams. Like, that was kind of how I thought of him, and now that I'm actually seeing him talk, I'm like, what an affable, lovely man. I can't believe that's what I thought of you. So anyway, I think that not only the content of this is very accessible, so I think if this is a topic that interests you, that this certainly, you know, will be easy to read. So it's very accessible, but also just, I think what it represents is why it has to be number one. And with that is my nonfiction list for 2022. Let me know what you thought about any of the books I talked about. Let me know what some of your favorite nonfiction books were this year, because I'm always looking for recommendations. And we only have one sub list left, which is romance, which will come out next week. And then we'll be to the big kahuna, the top 10 list, where I torture myself and force myself to pick the best of the best. So tune in to that, I guess, a week from Sunday. So with that, I think that does it for this video. So if you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below, and I think that will do it. I hope you are having an absolutely lovely day today, and I will just talk to you soon.